Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shamanda Burston. I'm a licensed clinical addiction specialist, professional mental health counselor of over a decade, author, and movie producer. Today we are talking all about the residual effects of childhood trauma and how it affects our adulthood. So stay tuned. So if you've been following me for a while, then you know I wrote a book. And not just any book, but a memoir. And that's all about my life, from childhood up until my early mid-20s. Family dysfunction. Nobody likes to admit it. Nobody wants to talk about it. But it's real. And it has effects. And it's not something that's easy to get over. And that's why, although I am a therapist myself, I advocate that everyone go to therapy to take care and address those traumatic experiences, because they do affect our lives and there can be lingering effects and you may not even notice them. Here are 5 areas that can be affected by childhood trauma in your adulthood. Alright, number 1, parenting. I know, you might think, you know what, if you didn't have great parents or it was just a bad situation, whether you were neglected, abused, or whatever in your childhood, one might think, well, if you experience that, then of course you're going to become a better parent than your parents were or your guardians. But that's not always the truth. One thing could be that you're striving for perfection, and if you are a parent, then you know there's no such thing as perfection in parenting. Okay, parenting does not come with a manual. That you don't leave the hospital with a manual saying, hey, this is how you take care of this child. We wish, right? Striving for perfection, you may want to try to not make any mistakes. And in doing that, you're messing up. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. And you know that because you've already experienced that as a child, right? So some things you might do is be overprotective and overly strict, which can drive your children to rebel when they're older or when they're teenagers, and we don't want that. We want to have healthy children and create and provide for them a healthy lifestyle and environment that we may not have had if we were, victims of some type of childhood trauma. So parenting is one area that can be negatively impacted by childhood trauma in your adulthood. Number 2, this is a big one for me, work. So if you're like me, I experienced workplace anxiety really bad. The thing I used to do all the time was worry if I was underperforming, if my supervisors liked my work and my work ethic. And although they would tell me, like, you are an excellent worker, you do such an amazing job, we're considering you for a supervisory, managerial position, it was just never enough for me. When you don't have that validation as a child, or maybe you weren't shown a lot of attention as a child, or you had to grow up and you had to affirm yourself and compliment yourself, or you were neglected in that area emotionally, then you're looking for that in your supervisors and your superiors at work. And even if they do tell you, sometimes you just still feel like it's just not enough, and you still feel like you're not performing well. That's the self-esteem stuff that comes up in your work. And so we may think, oh, that's childhood stuff, but it shows up in your work and it can negatively impact your ability to just level up in your career. So that's another area, work. Also, another issue at work could be not staying at a job for a long time. I know a lot of people, and myself included, where I would stay at a job maybe 6 months to a year tops, because I always had to change and do something different. And it correlated with that lack of stability that I had as a child. That traveled over and translated over to my work. So there was a lack of stability in my jobs as well, which really kind of worked to my advantage later on as I grew, because my resume was like this long with all these different positions, and they knew like I knew what I was doing, but they knew I wasn't going to stay too long either. So it looks like you're unstable. It looks like you don't know how to commit to something, a job, in a position. So it can negatively work against you. So the instability that you might have had as a child shows up at work. Number 3 area, friendships. I know, right? Friendships are already hard, even if you don't have any childhood trauma, but it makes it harder when you've had or experienced betrayals or neglect and abuse as children, because you're going to be expecting that betrayal and that dishonesty and disloyalty from your friends. And they can prove for years and years and years that they're going to be by your side, that they're not going to hurt you, that they're loyal. But because your family may have shown you those type of behaviors, or you experienced that and observed that and witnessed that as a child, you're going to see that and look for that in your friendships. And you're already going to be expecting that. And that's not fair to you, because there are good people out there, and there are people who are going to love you and want to be in your life, but you're going to sabotage you and push it away. So be aware of that. Your childhood trauma can affect your ability to have healthy friendships as an adult. Number 4. This is probably one of my favorites, right? Finances. So childhood trauma can affect your finances as an adult. How, right? How? Let's look at this. So you can go 2 extremes with this one. You can either be overly frugal and cheap, because you're like, oh my God, like I witnessed, coming home to the lights being turned off, no electricity, no food, being evicted over and over again. So let me save all my money. I'm not going to spend. I'm not going to shop. I'm not going to live my life. I'm not going to have any type of freedom or enjoy life at all. Or you can go the other extreme and be like careless, super careless, right? And impulsive with your spending, because that's where the instability shows up, right? And the lack of responsibility and accountability. And you may be mirroring what you saw as a child. Maybe one of your parents is like that and very irresponsible with finances, which is why you were getting evicted and lights and stuff was getting cut off, right? So it can go either way. So yeah, finances, not being stable with your finances can be a residual effect of childhood trauma in your adulthood. All right, of course I had to save this one, my favorite one, for last. Number 5, childhood trauma can definitely affect romance, love, and dating in your adulthood. This is probably a given. If you've experienced any type of trauma in your childhood, you definitely probably struggle with attachment issues, abandonment issues, inability or difficulty trusting your partner, and just being open to the idea of love, or even battling with the idea that someone can actually love you, right? Or accept you as you are, especially if there's some self-esteem issues that are there. And so what happens is, if one of your parents or both weren't there, there's this void. And I used to hear that all the time, that void, right? It's that hole. And what it looks like is that it lingers, because subconsciously you feel like if this person who birthed me or is responsible for creating me didn't even love me enough to stick around or be there for me or protect me or treat me in a good, healthy way, then what makes me think this person over here is gonna love me? He doesn't owe me anything, or she doesn't owe me anything. She doesn't have to be loyal to me. She doesn't have to stick around. Or he's probably gonna do me just like my father did or my mother did and leave me. These subconscious thoughts, you may not consciously be aware of them, but they're subconscious and they're in the background. They're those thoughts that ruminate sometimes, especially after an argument, right? You feel like, oh, well, that's it, that's done now, because they're not gonna forgive me, they're not gonna come around, or they're gonna go cheat because I made them mad, or because I said something they didn't like. You don't feel like you're forgivable, or that you're worth working things out with, or sticking by, and sticking with. Self-esteem, it's deep self-esteem, self-love issues that come from childhood trauma that will affect your ability to have a healthy romantic love relationship as an adult. And it's just not fair to you. It's really not fair. So those are my 5 areas that I personally have experienced as a survivor of childhood trauma. and how it affected me in my adulthood. And as a therapist, I have seen this in so many of my clients over the years. Definitely know and advocate that counseling and therapy will definitely help you address some of these areas, and all of these areas actually, to help you become a healthy and stable adult and not be a victim of this childhood trauma. You can have an amazing life, a beautiful, healthy life, and be loved and have great finances and be a great parent and have great, amazing friendships and have a great career and job and business or whatever you want for your life, and not be victim of that childhood. It's possible if you believe. All right, guys, thank you for watching. Leave me a comment below. How has childhood trauma affected you? And what are some areas you're still working on? Are you in therapy? If you're not, why not? Can't wait to hear from you guys. See you next time.